So what we're going to do is we're going to, over the next hopefully 3-4 weeks, we're going to go into three different students of the Maggid. The Kedushat Levi, Levi Yitschak of Berdichev.
Just as a Chabad.
And then
No.
he's not. No, it's different. It's Berdichev.
Okay, Berdichev.
Yeah, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, and then Zekusi Elenu, and then the Noam Elimelech, Rabbi Elimelech of Lezhensk, also Zekusi Elenu, also founded an amazing school of Chassidut. And then we'll end with the Alter Rebbe of Chabad, the Shnei Zalman of the Yadim, and we'll do a mimer of his, all on the same subject. Just to see how each one deals with the same subject, maybe can give us an idea what the teaching of the Maggid was or is on that subject. So after the Baal Shem Tov was the Maggid of Mezeritch, the Holy Maggid. And the Maggid did something extraordinary in that he gathered together hundreds of people came from around, and he kind of turned the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, which were very broad and very big, and he turned them and exposed them in a specific way, so that people could then take those teachings out into Europe and spread the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. So you could say he systematized kind of the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, but in a way that was respectful of the Baal Shem Tov. Oftentimes people come and they try to systemize, make something into a system that was organic, and it can ruin what came, because it's not respectful. So the Maggid came and he made a system out that people, he exposed the underlying structure, let's say, so then people could access it. With one quick story, one of my favorite stories about the Maggid when he came to the Baal Shem Tov. So he heard that Baal Shem Tov had a reputation as a healer, as a doctor. As a matter of fact, there's one book documenting his tax records came out some years ago. They found in Poland the tax records of the Baal Shem Tov. Wow. Unbelievable. He had actually, it's amazing. He had from the Polish government a tax exempt status.
As a doctor?
As a doctor.
Wow.
Yeah, he was not. So yeah, and a lot of the correspondence with rabbis was as a doctor who was an expert in herbal medicine. Unbelievable. So they were telling, people kept telling the Maggid, Dov Ber, to come to go see the Baal Shem Tov, and then finally someone said, "Look, at least go see him for refuah. Maybe he can help you." So he went, and there's this whole story. He comes in to see the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov starts talking to him about seemingly mundane matters. He starts talking to him about, he was in the marketplace picking fruit, and he found some very nice apples, and he's going on, and the Maggid just looks at him and says, I didn't come here to, he can't take it, and he leaves. So he comes back several times, and every time it's the same thing. The Baal Shem Tov is talking about seemingly mundane matters, and he doesn't get it, and finally in the middle of the night he's leaving. He just can't take it, and sometimes it was exactly what he needed, so he had to leave. So he comes, the Baal Shem Tov, right as he's leaving town, the Baal Shem Tov sends a messenger, says, the Baal Shem Tov insists that you come see him right now. So he figured, fine. So he goes, and he comes in, and the Baal Shem Tov has the Arizal. He's learning Arizal in the middle of the night. And he hands the Maggid the book, and he says, I want you to learn, tell me what it says here. Now the Maggid, this story illustrates a lot of things. One of it is that the Maggid knew how to learn the Arizal. And already. And he learned it out. And he told the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov said, no, it's wrong. And he said, no, it's not wrong. That's what it says. He said, no, it's wrong. And they're going back and forth, and the Baal Shem Tov says, let me show you. And so then he takes the book, and he starts saying the words, and it was all about angels. And as the Holy Baal Shem Tov said the names of the angels, they all appeared, each one. All of a sudden, there was this giant light in the room for each a different color, And the Maggid is, sitting there like, can't believe it,
Well, you are right.
Yeah, right. And so the Baal Shem Tov looked at him and he said, he said, the truth is, you were right, technically. He said, but he said your learning didn't have any life. It was dry. So that's just one of those traditional stories how their relationships really started. And so I think, again, so with the Maggid, you have this tremendous understanding of the structure of Judaism, the structure of the halakha, and the structure of the Kabbalah, and the structure of the Midrashim, and amazing ability. And then when he meets the Baal Shem Tov, what the story illustrates is he totally opened up the inside of all these things for him. So what he was then able to do was fuse the kind of what we talked about yesterday, the content and the structure, the inner and the outer, into one concept. And that's why Chassidut was, I think, able to spread so far, was because the Maggid was able to show it as a complete system that then people could transport and take with them out into the world. We'll start with the Kedushat Levi, Levi Yitschak of Berdichev, and was known as a very, very great, compassionate rabbi. And he always had in mind people and their needs, and we would sit with them and help them. It was, the famous, a lot of great stories. One story about Levi Yitschak of Berdichev was he was on Shabbos. He's walking along and he sees this Jewish man, and the Jewish man is smoking. So he walks over to him and he says, maybe you don't know. It's not permitted to smoke on Shabbat. And he says, no, I know. It's not, I know. He says, oh, maybe the doctor said you should, for whatever reason, if you have to smoke. So you need. He said, no. He said, no, I'm just, I like smoking. So the Kedushat Levi cries out and he says, God, look how honest your people are. They're so honest, they won't say a lie. Right? So he was always looking on the positive side, no matter what. Another great story is he's walking down the it's a great one. So there's a man and he's wearing talis and tefillin and he's greasing the wagon wheels. He's working. And one rabbi walks by and he looks at him and he says, oh, it's so terrible. It's Achil Hashem, you're wearing talis and tefillin and you're greasing your wheels. And how can you do such a thing? I mean, he had no choice. He had to work and he was trying to daven. But anyway, he's looking, how can you do such a thing? And the man kind of looks at him like, okay. And the rabbi walks on, he's very upset. The Kedushat Levi walks by, looks at him, he says, God, look how holy your people are. Even when they're greasing the wheels of a wagon, they're wearing talis and tefillin, they're thinking only of you. Right? So he was always looking at the good side of things, always on the kaf hazachut, always on the rachamim, always on the compassion, to judge every Jewish person he saw and every person he saw on the side of compassion. So that's Kedushat Levi. Please, yeah.
I don't know if for Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi or some kind of rabbi, he worked with his students, so they saw some dying animal. And maybe a sheep or a cow or something, or donkey, and they say, oh, how ugly is it, how smell and this. And then he said to them, my students, you don't see the teeth, how white they are? Beautiful,
From the Gemara.
Yeah. So it looked the positive, don't look the negative.
Yeah, the stories of walking by the base of Mikdash.
Another one. Rabbi for Akiva.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's similar. You're right. It's similar.
That's
It's similar.
I'm sure he probably learned. I mean, obviously.
But that's
For sure. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. No, it's well within our tradition. Absolutely. To judge. Absolutely. To look on the bright side. 100%. Yeah. Okay, so we have the Kedushat Levi on Shemot. We're going to do the Parshat Shemot just because it's a. I was trying to find, psukim where they kind of line up, where they each deal with the same psukim. I know one melody. There's a melody from the Kedushat Levi, and I know also a melody from Noam Melech, and I also know a melody from Shnezon of Liadis. So we'll sing. I thought each would be nice to sing just a little bit of the melody before, and then we'll start learning. Okay, the Eile Shmot B'nai Yisrael, these are the names of Jewish people, children of Israel. Goes on to name tribes. He says, Ki hine Shmot HaShvatim HaKadoshim Kasher Tireh Shem Shel Kol Echad Alma Nikra B'Shem Zeh. So the names of all of the holy tribes, as we'll see, the name of each tribe, why was it called that? Okay, so he quotes Bereshit, he goes back to the naming of the tribes. So Vatar Leah, and Leah became pregnant, but Teled Ben v'tikra shmo Reuven. She gave birth to a boy, and she called his name Reuven. Ki Amra ki ra'a Hashem ba'ani. She said, because Hashem saw with my affliction, and saw my affliction. Ki ata yehavani ishi. Now my husband will love me. Vatar od v'teled ben v'tomer ki shama Hashem ki snua anachi. V'ten li gam et zeb tikra shmo Shimon. Also, God heard that I was hated, and He gave me also this one, and I'm calling his name Shimon, from Lashon Shema, to hear. God heard. Tar od, Bateled ben, she became pregnant again, she gave birth to a boy. V'tomer ata hapam yelaveh ishi. Now, this time, my husband will, literally it's a company, but it also means be connected with me. Eli, towards me. Ki yaladati lo shlosha vanim al ken kara shemo Levi, to accompany, to make a connection, be connected. Okay, so those are the psukim, those are the names. Okay, so now he has a problem with this.
So
Kedushat Levi.
basically she's saying,
Yeah.
Yaakov gonna say, 2 kids you can handle by yourself, 3 I have to be with you. Yeah, that's what.
That's very good. That's good. I like it. That's great. That's very good. So he says, it's true. So he says, the truth is, the Kedushat Levi has a problem with these naming. He says, Hine be'emet chas v'shalom yivshal lomar sheshvatim yu nekraim al shumta v'gashmiut. It's impossible that the names of the tribes could be named after anything to do with a physical desire. Kagon Ruven, like Reuven, it's all having to do with physical dynamics. This is interesting, okay? V'kein shar Shvatim, Kagon Yisachar, all the rest of the tribes also. V'asher hine be'emet, so he says something very interesting here. Shmot Shvatim morim al ha'alot kol ha'tavot la'Hashem levada. Beruven ha'ala kol ha'tavot sheben ish l'ishto la'bor et bara. V'chein b'Shimon v'chein Levi mor aliyot kol ha'itchabut la'bor et bara. So all of the tribes have to do with the naming has to do with different physical processes, different physical desires. And he says a very interesting thing here, that the naming of the tribes had to do with the raising up of the physical to the spiritual. And each tribe is doing that in a different way. So he says, there's a concept in, obviously, how does a spiritual person deal with the physical reality? This is a very important question for the Hasidim. And a very big chidush of the Baal Shem Tov was that we no longer deny the physical. So that was a big deal at the time. We don't deny the physical. We raise it up. So he says that this is what's going on with the names of the tribes. At the very roots of the Jewish people is this concept of raising up the physical to the spiritual. So he says so each one in its own way. He says a very interesting thing here. What is the word mateh? Right? He says because of this concept of raising up, that's why they're called matot. L'chein nikraim hashvatim matot. They're called staves.
Oh.
They're called matot. Okay? So listen to that. No?
No, we were doing that on Shabbos. Yes.
Okay. So he says, from milashon mateu michalon lechalon. Lashon mateh, to move over from one window to the next. It's quoting the Gemara. Klomar she'atavot agashmiot ha'eleu la'borei Torah. Meaning, v'zeu ve'ele shmot b'nei Yisrael. Shmot ba'atzma morim al aliyot kol advorim la'borei Torah v'yitalei Zifro. He's saying an interesting thing here. How do you raise up the physical? How do you uplift? How do you exist in a physical world with spiritual values? Let's say. How do you do it? Right? So there's many different approaches. The approach of the Hasidim and the approach of the Kedushat Levi here specifically is it's not as heavy as it seems. We take something physical and we just move it over a little bit. We just turn it a tiny bit this way. So good. So you like drinking wine. It's wonderful. Just at Kiddush on Friday night, have a big cup of wine. That's when you have wine. Good. Just a little bit. It's not that you don't drink wine, that you make Kiddush on wine. Right? It's just we take the physical and we just move it slightly this way. And in a way, you could look at all of Judaism that way. It's not saying you have to do everything, you have to change your entire way of being. No, just a little movement. Just move it over just a tiny bit. Just move it just a little bit connected with God, towards God, the direction of God. And when you do that, just, let's say, look, we have to work in the world, we have to do things. But one day a week, just one day, don't worry. Don't do it. Just one day. It's really only one day. Just a little. So that's the concept of the tribes. Okay? So he goes on something very interesting. Kind of continues along this in the second. But Kenizkar la'el shenirasha imot karu et hashvatim al shem ha'moraot shelahem. So he's saying here, look, it seems like the imahot were naming according to what was happening in their lives, which is also good. But he says there's something deeper going on. when the Imahot named the tribes and they named the Jewish people, they were showing us something very fundamental about being Jewish. That there's something very something going on when they named the tribes. It wasn't just right, and so we'll see this whole concept of raising up the physical is really basically saying it's initiated from the very moment, the very birth of the Jewish people. And so it was initiated by the Imahot. It's very interesting. He said, there's kind of a negative thought that God is so high that he doesn't have anything to do with anything beneath him. So the naming of the tribes was to show us the exact opposite. Even though God is the highest of the high, he's beyond, infinite, we can't understand, he's beyond. He pays attention to what's going on beneath him, so to speak, right? He pays attention. It matters what we do. It's important. And everything happens according to his desire. This is why the Imahot named the tribes. To show us that it matters what happens in this world, that God is paying attention, right? Like logically, if you look at it's logical to assume God exists. It's not necessarily logical, although it is essentially logical. But on first glance, it's not necessarily logical to think that God cares about what we do, that God has anything to do with us. Typically in spirituality, there's God and then there's us, and there's this, and we try to make connections. What we're going to see here, the Jewish conception is that there's God, and that we're connected to God, and so what we do matters, right? So the Imahot brought this concept into the world when they named their children. God is to do and has to do with everything that happens wherever it is. It's one system. God is one. There's just God. And nothing happens that's not God's will. Period. Again, we call them matot to push to the side a little bit, to bend towards God. Lashon mateo lahorot she'af al pi she'kadosh baruch hu ram al ramim mashgiach kivyachol lemata al kol naset lemata. Right? Hakol naset kirtzano v'zehu matot lashon hitia milamala lemata. Right? So it's also right to go. So on the one hand, we're paying attention to God. We're focusing on God. We're taking the physical and we're just moving it to be God-centered. But at the same time, God is sort of doing the exact opposite at the same time, so to speak. He's peering just over to look at us, so to speak. Meaning he's involving himself in this world. God, so to speak. So that's the concept of matot or mateh. So the tribes represent this concept that even though God is Ram al Ramim, is the high on high, so to speak, separate from the world, he, so to kivyachol, right? He's not physical, so we can't say he actually turns. So to speak, he's paying attention. He pays attention to us. It matters. Everything that happens is connected with him, right? According to his will. So we have here a concept here that's quite amazing. Okay, so you have a mateh. So it's a staff, right? Like Ami said, it's a staff, and so you've got 12 staffs. So what the Kedushat Levi staff is, it's representing someone who's standing up and saying, I'm strong. But the Jewish conception of a leader is that, yes, I'm strong, but I lean my strengths in the direction of Hashem. I understand that all my strengths, everything I have comes from Hashem. Right? So therefore each one is centered around God. And so then each one can be connected to each other also. So he uses an example here, something very striking. And again, what I want to do here is try and figure out, this is a central concept in Chassidut. How raising up the physical. How do we deal with physical reality as God-centered or spiritual people? And so the concept of sanctifying the everyday, or raising up the everyday, is central to Chassidut and central to being Jewish. And so what he's talking about here is, again, you don't destroy the physical. You don't ignore the physical. You don't aggrandize the physical. You simply take your life and you just turn it towards, so that it's angled, so to speak, towards God, right? Whichever way it is. And whatever your particular talents are and your particular predilections are, you take this and you just gently move them towards God. So he says an amazing thing here. V'lakach nikru shvatim 12 gevulei alachsa. There are the 12 what do you call it? Intersections. There are 12 lines that intersect each other. Unbelievable. Right? It's geometry. There are 12 lines that intersect each other. He's quoting Sefer Yetzirah, the Zohar, and also Sharei Ora. Ki zeh shekadosh baruch hu bara olamo mashgiach b'maaseh ha'elyonim zeh nikra kav hayashar. When God is, so to speak, involving himself with, he created the world, and he pays attention to what's going on above, right? This is called the straight line. And God has to do, the straight line is God has to do with spiritual things. He's God, right? But and out of the spiritual, he created the world. That which God limits himself, the tzimtzum, and guides everything according to his will, this is called the the diagonal line. These are the lines that go diagonal. It's not straight. It's going diagonal. Milamala lamata, from above to below. L'chein, Mash Yisrael osim b'tzom Hashem yitbarach b'maseh hanasa lamata. And also, the Jewish people do what God wants here. It descends from the upper world to the lower. The hishtalshelut, the olamot, unfurling of the worlds. It's very interesting here. So he says that line really is, let's say, what he's really talking about here is that line is inner. It's an inner line. It's the inner line. So again, inner and upper are really the same, because obviously it's not literally upper. God is not literally sitting on top of the galaxy or something. There are hundreds of thousands of galaxies, right? So God's not literally upper. It's inner. God is inner, the inner universe. And the 12 tribes sit around the inner universe. So the concept is what's called a cube octahedron, which is one. If you have if you have 13 spheres, and you have one sphere, and you have, how many spheres could fit around that one sphere that are the same size, right? If you do it with pennies, it's 6 fits around one if they're all the same size. You take 7 pennies, take 1 penny, put it in the middle, 6 fit around. With spheres, it's 12 fit around 1, so it's 13. So it's a perfect illustration of the concept that the Kedushat Levi is talking about, which is the 12 spheres around one, the 12 gevulei alachsa, that circle, that point inwards towards the one line, the one. So it's an amazing thing. This conception is again, we talk about, each person has their sphere of influence, you could say. Each person has their people they know and people they feel comfortable with, right? And so they often don't necessarily go together. They all stay in everyone's else spheres stay separate, right? But I guess the conception here is that's only if the spheres are not turning towards the center, which is turning towards God. If the concept here is if we take those things that make up who we are and they're slightly turned towards the center, then we can all exist around a similar. We can all exist together, even though we're all different. We can all learn to exist. I did obviously find an example of this in Stan Tenen's book, which is a cube octahedron, which is I made some copies if you want. It's quite interesting. What's fascinating to me is that I've seen the Yud Beit Alachson mentioned also by the Alter Rebbe, and it's an amazing thing. The conception. There's a question. Why were first of all, we're trying to figure out, basically this class is trying to figure out what was being taught in Mezeritch that allowed them to go to the far reaches of Eastern Europe and beyond. I mean, if you think about even into the 21st century, what allowed Chassidut to go beyond this very local phenomenon? And I think part of the answer, again, in this, we're learning Shemot, so we're doing Kedushat Levi and the Noam Elimelech, and then the Balatanya, Milenu. The Kedushat Levi explicitly mentions the cube octahedron. There's nothing else. There's the 12 diagonal lines around the center. He explicitly mentions it. The Alter Rebbe explicitly will learn a piece on Shemot where he explicitly mentions embryology and processes in embryology and how it relates to being Jewish. The Noam Elimelech talks about internal and external, and the tzaddik is going between. So there's clearly in the school of Mezeritch there's a lot going on. But one of the for the record, so to speak, one of the reasons Chassidut was able and is able to bridge the gap between many different types of people and many different types of experiences was because it was a holistic view of reality. It didn't not include any one aspect of reality. And so it was, or another way to say this, it was a synthesis of the outside and the inside, of a deeply structural and deeply scientific view of reality, which you could say was also a Yerusha from the Baal Shem Tov, because he was a doctor and he understood physical processes as well as spirit. He had for his time a great grasp of medicine, and he also had obviously a great grasp of spirituality. In some sense, so to say, but he had both. And so you see in the school of Mezeritch,
Maggid was a doctor.
The Baal Shem Tov.
Oh,
you see in the school of Mezeritch, you see again a synthesis of many different ideas as being expressed, as being inclusive as one idea, one concept. I think we started with this, that the ability to again to connect the structure and the content, the inner and the outer, as one system, right? Which is precisely what he's talking about here, that there's one God. There isn't God is there and we're here, right? And God doesn't involve himself with us. And there's one God, and he's everywhere all the time. And it becomes about, in Chassidus, learning to open our consciousness up to God and to be aware of what's going on.
So how do these 12 things relate to this spirit?
That's a good question. I don't know. I really don't know. That's a great
You
question.
just said there's 12 angles
structure.
where the Shefa dark comes into the earth. Is that what he's
Well, Kedushat Levi, right? V'lakach nekru shvatim 12 gvulei alachsa. The 12 diagonal vertices.
What does he say about them now?
So he says what it represents is basically the connection between us and God, and between God and us. So it's to do with it's to do with how do we, again, he's dealing with here, how do we include physicality in spirituality? How do we deal with physicality? And one of, obviously, the central teaching of the Baal Shem Tov is, from the Baal Shem Tov on, they were no longer putting down physicality, rather they wanted to include it. And so it's part of a worldview that of inclusiveness. And this is obviously, Hasidus was very popular in Eastern Europe, and precisely because of this, because they didn't say, stop greasing the wheels of your wagon when you have your talis and tefillin on. They said, no, it's inclusive. You can be a holy Jew and be working and be doing something in the world. You don't have to dedicate. It's inclusive. God is inclusive. And so what he's saying here is that in the very structure of reality, this is the cube octahedron is a very important shape in mathematics. In the very structure of reality is an illustration of the Jew's connectedness and ability to connect all spheres to God. Right?
So why they hate the Hasidic, that type?
The truth is that the Hasidic masters and the non-Hasidic masters were learning the same things.
Totally.
They were totally learning the same things, and most of them were very adept at mathematics and astronomy and embryology. I mean, and geometry and medicine. And the difference is that the Hasidim. I think the difference is. I'm not knocking anyone, but maybe I'm a little bit. But the difference between the Hasidim and the Misnagdim then was that the Hasidim saw every bit of knowledge as a way to include. It was a way by which, again, they could include all spheres of life, all types of people could be included. And so that knowledge was a way by which they could learn inclusion. And in the non-Hasidic world, knowledge was a way that they could promote exclusion. What we need to do, and what's so beautiful about this is again, learn to include, that to be inclusive of each other. It's apropos for this time period.
What do you mean by inclusive? Who are they including? What do you mean by
everyone they met.
But who's they and who apparently?
Kedushat Levi.
They were including everyone they met?
Everyone he met, he included in his connection with God, 100%.
Why God didn't bring us to Israel, come to that sense, is one nation, not divided, is tribe. One group.
Because there are these different aspects, so to recognize that there are like all these different facets of, of personalities, of tendencies, of strengths, of, each tribe, had their own, they were known as different things, and same with each person. So, and each person has different spirit that are stronger, and then each tribe has different aspects that are stronger, so then it couldn't, so together we're all one. Together we're all one, together with the focus on God, with God being one, and we're part of God, and that whole picture, on the cellular, each person level, and then the big picture, we're all one, so that's how we have to be all together.
It's a concept of inclusiveness. Again, when I just kind of sum up these, you said it right, each tribe contains maybe a group of people who kind of all have similar tendencies and a similar surround, and so that's one circle. But then the job of that circle is to turn, the job of each individual, and then the job of the circle in its entirety is to turn towards God. And God is, and basically what this is saying is that God is all inclusive. God doesn't not include anyone. And so the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. Particularly Chamsa Bar Chamsa was the whole concept of the party they had was because they were exclusive and they didn't invite. Exclusivity destroyed the temple. Period. That's what the teaching of the rabbis. And so that therefore the fixing is inclusive.